Welcome to another edition of Consensus Unreality. We are joined today by a very, very special guest, Dan Dutton.
Welcome, Dan.
Welcome back.
My pleasure to be here with you again.
A returning guest, and
yes,
our first guest in...
You know you're not hideous if they ask you that.
And if you see me get up from screen, it's because I'm gonna take a pee probably, because I feel like this is gonna be a nice lengthy interview.
I will try to hold you till your bladder screams.
Dan has given us permission to use some snippets of his music in this episode, so we are delighted to mix that in, and we'll have some images and documentation of Dan's artworks and performances of some of his operas. And
fantastic.
We're very excited to have some of that stuff in there. So I've got some interesting questions here, and you know, if you didn't listen to the first interview we did with Dan, definitely a good idea to check that out. Nice lengthy interview, and I think we're going to try and double back into some interesting territory this time as well. I feel like I've got a good question to start with. It's kind of a macro question, but I did write it down, and I wanted to ask you, how would you characterize the soul of America?
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll start off by tackling this word America. America properly means the continent. It's themselves, North America and South America, this sort of came to my attention in an odd way because I was friends with a curator, Larry Ringer, who was the curator at the Whitney Museum of Art back some years back. And he brought this issue up because the Whitney was supposed to be the Museum of American Art, right? That's what it's called. And
Yeah.
he got actually tossed out in part because he dared put on a show which he called the American Effect, which was a show of what people in other countries thought about America, the art they made about America, and never really thought before how quickly we assume that America means us, but we don't think about Mexico and Canada, as being part of America too. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So we'll talk about the United States of America, their soul, because the soul of America, I would think, would have to mean Canada and Mexico too. And I'm just too unfamiliar to represent. But when it comes to the United States, I guess, Dandyland has officially amicable relations with the United States of America. I mean, we are a sovereign state here. I say we in the plural as an affectation. But, we are a sovereign state, and we do recognize the legitimacy of the United States of America, especially since they carry such a big stick and tend to show it all the time. You have to keep that in mind when you're talking about them, not to say anything that will make them irate. But at this point in time, it is an interesting place. I see a world in which youth holds great promise, but is dangerously entranced with our methods of communication that we have at present, to an extent that I have to wonder, how that might work out. I see some terrible, we talked about dark, Dan. I see some terrible things that, barefoot people like me get puncture wounds sometimes in your feet, like the worst is to step on a nail or some bullshit like that, a piece of broken glass or a nail. I haven't done that since I was a kid, but I have done it before. I have stepped on a nail before. And those kind of wounds, if you're an herbalist like me, are ones that are so tricky to do anything about. Like clean them. Okay, yeah, clean it. What does that mean? You can only clean the surface. The puncture goes down into there. Is there rust? Is there filth? Is there something that's been pushed inside of you? And if, there are certain herbs that I use to cure flesh wounds with here, like holy basil or yarrow, which cause wounds to knit up really quickly. But that's not a good idea with a puncture wound. Like if you knit the surface of it over, you may trap the infectious aspect below the skin. You've sealed off the top, and now you've got this shit that's sealed under the skin. And that's what I think about the soul of America right now. There is some filth sealed under the skin of it, and it's causing some infection. And the body politic itself, or the body of of us as a community, of people as a community, we're sort of at a point at this point where that we either try to process and filter this poison internally, or we try to reopen the wound and clean it from the outside in. And because of the hysteria that comes with social media, which is our main way of communicating with each other now, everything's always turned to 11. Ever since Spinal Tap, nobody's ever turned anything to 10. Everything's been to 11 ever since then. So that's really the first thing people think. Cut the wound open again and go back in. But really, I think probably at this point, there's both things that have to happen. There's a lot of stuff that has to be processed in this country before things can move forward. And we're probably not going to process it. So we have to move forward with a lot of unprocessed stuff in all probability, but it's good to know that that is what is actually happening. I mean, there's some realities here that people came to this country from other countries, and now we're starting to talk about the white people versus the not white people, the brown people, or here there becomes a problem of language even. I know personally from having friends that most of the tribal people I know prefer to be described as being Indians if white people have got to talk about them and they can't say what tribe they're talking about. So the tribes themselves have this ordeal. This land was forcibly taken. These resources were forcibly taken from another people, and that's an injustice. And when you build your house on shifting sands, you cannot have moral authority. You know what I'm saying? There's no moral authority coming until some kind of things are made right about that. So we have, as a nation, as a country, what is America? Nation, country, or whatever, we have an issue there. And that there are debts owed that are not being paid, and there are damages done that are not being recognized. And the same follows true for the resources that we have that cause us to be so powerful in what we do. Much of them are here because of the efforts of people, which the majority of the people here describe as otherness. And as speaking from someone who's on the far spectrum of otherness, I haven't even agreed to this human thing. They keep throwing it up and offering it to me, but I don't know. I don't know about this. I don't know. There's a lot there that I feel this every day in my work. A lot of what I'm able to do has to do with advantages that I have that are historically based on deprivations that other people have experienced because they were able to be described as others.
Right.
So we have a melting pot that's not quite melted.
Right. Yeah.
And so the soul of America is in some pain. I think everybody feels it. We're all feeling some of this uneasiness, some of this pain, and we're all seeing the froth on the surface of it. The froth, part of the froth has orange hair and spouts, all kinds of absurdities. Part of it is a turgid resistance to fluidity that would help modernity. Is that what is coming into being? Seems to prevent us from living fully in the moment, tethered to so much of the wrongs of the past. So maybe that's a lot to answer about the soul of America. So having pointed out some of the negative parts, I do want to balance that, because I'm a person who believes that harmonious balance and moderation, sometimes at least in all things, is a good thing. So for some harmonious balance, I think it's a tremendously exciting and creative time, at least for arts. And that's just all I'm going to talk about from this point forward. I'm going to leave politics and, social issues somewhat to the side to try to talk about art. But for art now, there are certain things that have to do with technology, which are making musical possibilities for me as a musician and a composer that were difficult to attain in the past. Also, my music, which was completely opaque and ridiculous to people at the time that I was making it, is beginning to be perceptible now, and maybe even precious in some sense. And that, for me personally, is very positive. I see and talk with the young artists who are making things, and I think that they're very sharp. And I know a lot of very intelligent and very creative people. So I'm not at all, as a matter of fact, I loathe people who are like addicted to nihilism, it's like they just have to take a shot of it every time something. It's like one of those games where you have to take a shot of nihilism every 15 minutes or something or other. And I don't think that's at all maybe fun for a while, but it's not at all positive thing for you to do in your life. So I see a lot that's really great there. I see some aspects in our contemporary culture are calling bullshit in places that really helps clear some things up that should have been clear to begin with. And that seems very, very positive to me as an artist. I mean, I like that aspect of things a lot. From my own point of view, I'm not horribly oppressed right now, except the impressions I do on myself every day for entertainment. I guess that's why I do them. And I feel good about being able to make art, and I feel like I'm able to communicate with people. It's just as hairy as it ever was. I mean, I think that that you're on the right path as an artist when you're having some real struggles and real challenges.
Yeah.
It's like, for me anyway, at the point in time when I start feeling comfortable about something, that's the time to ask some serious questions. Like, what would it be like if you take this away? This thing that's making you feel comfortable about art, what if you take that out of the picture? Then what is there? So I like that. I like that feeling, and I like that idea. So I'm going to say the soul of our nation is severely challenged right at the present.
Yeah.
Possibly as much as it's ever been challenged, but maybe not. Possibly as much as it's ever been challenged. But this is precisely the challenge that human beings need in order to rise to the occasion. I mean, it's really, nobody gets through this thing without some challenges.
Yeah.
I mean, even inertia and ennui are like overwhelming enemies.
I think, it's a very poignant answer. And I think you bring up some really interesting things in there. And I raised the question came to mind like a while ago. I was reading about American Spirit Tobacco and how the name was conceived.
Right.
And I think it was from either Hegel or Heidegger said that the spirit of America was tobacco. And I thought this was like kind of a funny question to ask somebody like you, because I feel like your art is transcendent, but it is also quintessentially American in a way. Like you are an American folk artist in a lot of ways. And I thought that you would have an interesting answer there. And when you talk about those cultural debts that are owed and stuff, I think it's interesting how those things kind of get translated into the idea of like an American haunting, and I think this is something that's kind of talked about with the film The Shining, and the way that Kubrick approached it as kind of encapsulating American atrocities and horrors, things like so abstract and stretched out into this compacted labyrinthian, horror.
That's weird. I just read The Shining like a week ago, the book.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, one of the things I think that is a sign of the times or an aspect of the times. The labyrinth is very much a symbol that resonates right now. And when COVID was a difficult year for me, because I guess long COVID, I'll never know for sure, that something got fucked up entirely that year with me health wise. And so there's like 2 years there of a whole lot of strangeness that I think maybe everyone experienced it's like, where are the boundaries of society anymore? What is touching another person about? These were a lot of questions that I had worked with in the past, in the theater and working on the operas. I had been there working and thinking about these very questions, but suddenly the decisions about how they were going to operate were taken out of my hands, and they became things that were operating from a totally, now there was a virus in charge. Now there was the government in charge of this. Now there was our culture in charge of it, where people would make these decisions about where the boundary line is between us as people, and who is included and who is excluded, were suddenly being filtered from a totally different point of view. And that definitely for me, even though it was a difficult time, it allowed me to make some strides forward in my work that I'm not sure I could have conceived of otherwise.
Yeah. COVID was so strange, with most of all, I think, those boundaries between people and cultural boundaries. And I think that might even be what, to some extent, it's remembered for. It was the sort of liquid nature of that time. Yeah, it was really strange.
When you mentioned folk art, it's so interesting to me because I remember early on, as I began working, having all these curious titles applied to me, like that one. I mean, I decided I wasn't going to go to art school, wasn't going to go to college, even though I was advised to, I was lectured at to do it. I would have done it, I suppose, but I'm such an imp of the contrary that I felt like, well, wait a minute, why? Why should I do this? And is it really helping the art, or is it just helping the status quo in a way that it became, if you don't do that thing, if you don't go through an agreed upon prescribed program of how you educate yourself as an artist, or how you learn to make the things you make, then you're going to be one of these things. And I was called all of these things. I was called a primitive artist. And I thought, primitive? Okay. Well, I like the sound of that, because, that's like at the beginning, right? It's like primal, primitive, primary. All these things are at the beginning of process. So yeah, that's true. I feel like that in what I do, I try to get to the beginnings of things. And so that one was okay. Autodidact, that one. Okay, I'm just not even going to go there because that's too complicated, but if you say so. But I didn't really teach myself entirely. I did learn myself entirely, but I had mentors and I had sources, and I even had a process and a program. I mean, to a certain degree, I learned about art in a very old-fashioned way, because my introduction, coming from a very rural world and not having, professors or anyone to tell you what you should do or what you should look at. I sort of looked at the artists that I thought were highly accomplished ones, able to draw and paint and sculpt in the ways and compose in the ways that I was interested in doing it. And I looked at how they learned to do what they did. Well, the artists of the Renaissance, they were apprentices. They started as apprentices in, the workshops of painters that they admired. And that's what the Chinese say. They're like, choose one of the ancient masters, his work you admire, and copy it until you become an artist. That's the way you do it. You just keep copying, and eventually you will learn how to do it. So I did some of that copying. I made drawings from the paintings of Titian and Caravaggio and Michelangelo and the other artists that at the time that I admired. I tried to, sort of like see if my drawing skills were there or not. And I did all the things too that you would do in an old fashioned, like a classical drawing course, where that you try to learn to draw, by looking at things and drawing them, so that I would get the skills. And that was one of the reasons I didn't go to art school and got these titles is because when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I was quite devoted to what I was doing. There was a rule then that I had to do one accomplished drawing every day. And if I missed a day, I had to do 2 the next day. So I actually worked much more devotedly then than I do now. Now I'm just like Donald Trump. I say I do it in my head. I just draw in my head and it's done. But in those days, I actually was training my hand, how to do things. So I was called a folk artist too, but I'm like, when do people use the word folk? They're never talking about themselves. It's always a condescending word. Like they're fine artists and they're folk artists. And I thought, well, that's kind of condescending, until I got in the folk world of music, like the world of folk music. And I mean, I guess it's true of all genres, but people are very exclusivist and elitist in every way. And the folk people are the same way. You're not pure enough. Just because I listened to one Brian Eno record.
Yeah, I think that whole thing, the nomenclature, the genre, is something very interesting. Like, I know that folk, the idea of folk art is always equated with self-taught and outsider art, but to me, when I would say folk art, I think it's more having to do with a relationship to regional culture and things like that. I think like experimental is one of those terms too, where it no longer means what it originally meant. It just kind of describes something as a useful blanket term. It's interesting how those things kind of get obscured over time.
I was really a sort of junior scientist when I was a child too. I really believed in the scientific method. I'm a little more skeptical now that I've seen it demonstrated at length, but I do think that in my art, I've thought of myself as the subject of an experiment. I think, that's where what you're talking about, the folk aspect becomes strong, beyond the fact that I've come out of a regional culture that has shaped my language, my ideas, the environment I live in, the social interactions, what is considered right and wrong. A whole lot of things are about place. They're about a certain place. More than that, in my work, I'm about an ecosystem. I'm about a very specific ecosystem, and it's one that's centered right on this one little hill in the knobs of Kentucky. It's a distinct ecosystem. If you look through my work, if you could see the entirety of it, you would see what the plants and animals and people of this area are like, at least seen through the eyes of this particular subject. you know. You can call me Petri dish number 31. You know, that's the one where this experiment is growing and blooming. And part of it has had to do with me having a devotion to this place and to this ecosystem and being an equitable member of it. You know, like I'm just one thing here on this particular hill at this particular time. There's some giant nearly old growth trees that are extremely important. They maintain the temperature and everything else. There are a lot of creatures, a lot of plants. I grow most of my food. And so, you know, everything is very interlocked here. But with my art, much of it evolved through travel. It evolved through seeing what happens whenever a creature that lives in this ecosystem ventures out into the others. And what happens then? What is that like? Because not everything that lives here in this ecosystem I live in stays here all year round. You know, there are birds here that go to South America in winter and come back in the summer right here to this same hill again and again. And I'm kind of an example of that too. I mean, I spent a good portion of my life traveling all over the globe, you know, all around the planet several times, in different places, picking up what that was like and what those systems were like, and also sort of feeling like, what are the strengths that I bring from the place I come from, and what are the weaknesses I bring from the place I come from. All those things kind of were revealed to me in that process, and I brought them back here and wove them into this tapestry that I'm making here. So, you know, I think one of the most interesting amongst the titles, there was primitive artist, folk artist, autodidact, and then I'm trying to think of this term. It's one that would have to do with you being mentally ill. I mean, the art of the mentally ill was one of the first areas that I began to seriously study.
Yeah.
Try to understand what my own perception was about.
Not like a savant.
Idiot savant. That was the title.
Yeah.
that struck me the strongest. I was like, oh great, I've like made the top out of the list. Idiot savant. You know, I felt like Iggy Pop at that and time. I think all these are interesting ways that someone tries to categorize someone else, because there's a hierarchical aspect that's working.
Sure.
And, you know, as amazing as academia can be to accomplish certain things, and I utilize it, I work with it in my own ways. A lot of it wouldn't have made sense to me. Like if I had tried to study using the systems that exist, like the university system, the college system, to study, who would have known as a painter that I needed to study linguistics? I really need to understand what Proto-Indo-European was. You know, that wouldn't have been in the course syllabus.
Yeah.
For me, I had to absorb the things that I needed to make the things I was going to make, and I had to choose those. And the result was that, like I say, nowadays the world is more open to the kind of artist that I am, and the kind of artist that I was then. I think it's a little bit more open to it. But during the time that I was coming up, it was just opaque and ridiculous. You know, the things I did were ridiculous. I think people more or less felt they were just like crazy. They couldn't ignore them somewhat entirely because they had enough heft and enough complexity. I managed to lure in enough people involved in them and get enough done with it that you couldn't entirely ignore it, even though they wanted to ignore it. I do think, generally speaking, that the culture I came up in would have preferred to ignore my art. Possibly ignore me too, as well. I was an inconvenient person.
Do you want to interject there, Ben, at all yet?
Well, yeah, I was wondering, this got me thinking about, so I got that pan painting from you, which I adore. It's incredible. And we were talking about it like before you sent it to me, and you were saying it was inspired to a certain extent by that artist, Tiepolo, the Italian painter and stuff. And yeah, I was kind of, and which that sort of art, like you were just talking about, really makes me think of like technique and like sort of, the mastery of certain forms and compositions. But then some of the other art that I see you post feels to me, I'm not a visual artist, but it feels to me more interested in evoking like a sort of spiritual or resonant kind of thing to it. Where do you see like how do you see those two aspects of an artistic practice playing off of one another, like the sort of formal aspect, but then also sort of the more intuitive side?
There was a painter that just made a comment the other day on something I posted. I posted a painting of a red-winged blackbird that I had met.
I saw that. Yeah.
Okay, so that painting, there's a pond here. It's actually on my neighbor Richard's place, but it's kind of connected to Dandyland. And when you're driving out on the little road driving out of Dandyland, you pass by this pond. So I passed by it, not every day, but several times, and the weird history happened there. There were some muskrats that got in there, and they ate all of the cattails. I don't know if you know this plant that were growing around the pond. They ate them all. They wiped them out there. And the red-winged blackbirds that were coming there were nesting in these cattails. I was like, where are they going to nest? Well, they found places turns out, in the field and in other plants to build their nests, but they didn't have them to land on. I was very used to seeing, going by and seeing these birds landing on. There's a reed growing by the edge of the pond, and I saw a red-winged blackbird. It was the only thing sticking up high enough to be a place where you could land on it and sing and say, hallelujah, here I am, or whatever the blackbirds are saying when they make that amazing song. Yeah. And I would be driving by it, and I would see this bird with the reed. It was just strong enough to hold it up, but it was bending it down, And I saw it, and I thought, I need to snap a picture of that. I never was such a camera devotee until cell phones that made them easy, portable, and small. But I think of it as being like an eyeball on a stalk. This is a snail or a slug reference. You know how snails have those eyeballs that can extend out on a stalk?
Yeah.
Pull them back in. Sounds like that's what a cell phone is to me. It's like an eyeball on a stalk. You can send it out, you can click, you can take an image of something, and you can draw it back into your practice. And maybe you can look at it and there's something there that will help you make a painting. I don't like paintings that are, when people say, and they do say this sometimes when they see images of my work, they'll say, oh, that looks like a photograph, just like a photograph. Or someone, even with that painting, did confuse it with a photograph. And they were intending to give me the highest compliment.
Right.
But actually, I sort of dislike that. It's not hard to paint photographs. Really, it isn't. You just have to be patient and diligent, to do that. Do it pixel by pixel. It'll look exactly like it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
right.
It does take some skill to begin to paraphrase the photograph and turn it into a painting. But that's not what I'm really interested in when I'm capturing things. Anyway, I saw this bird on this thing several times, but every time I was either with a friend, I was in a hurry to get somewhere. It's not in a place where you can really stop in the road safely and take a picture anyway. So it would be an image I would whiz past and I'd think, that's a painting. I know I can paint that. I just need to snap a picture of it. And finally, I realized after like a dozen times of seeing it that I was not going to get a photograph of it. And the time came around, my muse said, "You're ready to paint, paint." And I had a canvas stretched and I was like, okay, I don't have an image to work from, but I know what this looks like. So I painted it entirely from memory. And it works, I know enough about painting birds and painting plants and how to do that I was able to construct that artificially completely. You know what I'm saying? It was made out of whole cloth. Nothing was actually there at all. And to some people, it looked very much like a photograph once I had done it. That's not at all really the journey of how I got there to that place. Anyways, complicated story, I know. But this painter came on, and he's someone who was highly trained, like a portrait painter, someone who went to, school and became a very trained portrait painter. And he made a nice comment about the painting. He said, you're an interface between us and nature, and it's always so beautiful and so poignant. And I really, that brought me back around to what was kind of really happening with the painting. What he's talking about is the feeling. I guess the feeling is the word you would use there to describe it, the feeling or the emotion that you have from seeing an image like that. And it made me think about it. Oh yeah, a few people know this bird and they know the sound of this bird, or maybe they don't even know it, but the birds singing in the springtime, and there's something about that whole thing that strikes a note of hopefulness to people, but also points out maybe how transient those things are, how temporal, and then it becomes about us, then it becomes about our life. Oh, we're beautiful, but we're transient too. We're not going to last all that long. We're just a glimpse. We're just a flash of light. It's like the French philosopher said, the photograph is just a flash of light of something which will never exist again. It'll be gone. And that's been pointed out about my work before, how it is related to that idea of photography, even though maybe I'm just a meat-based camera.
It's the reverie too, right? I mean, the reverie is something that you've talked about before with Debussy and the influence of Debussy in your work. I'm gonna slide in here a listener question because I feel like it's a good time.
Good.
The beauty of the internet too is that we fielded a few listener questions for the interview. So yeah, this is kind of a two-part. This comes from listener Buckers and listener Cool Toad using their handles. But you mentioned
I'm all about some toads.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned the muse. So to you, where do you think creativity comes from, and what are your thoughts on channeled art? We're hitting you with the macro stuff, right?
Oh, I love this question because I've heard it before, and I'm gonna use the same answer I used then. The first show that I did, because I didn't come up through any sort of system, I just came out of left field to these people. I approached an art museum when I was in my early 20s. This was in a university near. I won't tell the name of the college, but I approached them and I was like, I'd like to do a show of work in your art museum, and weirdly they agreed to it. And I was so naive and unschooled at the time that I used an exactly precise word for what I was doing. I called it a retrospective, which is something people usually do later
Yeah, yeah.
rather than at the beginning. But I had a lot of work. I had been working really hard for a long time, and I had pieces that I thought were the best. And so, anyways, I was able to fill this art museum pretty much full. And it was because it was a university art museum. Part of it was, part of the deal was, is that I do a question and answer session with the senior art students who were practically my age at the time, you know? So that was a little odd. They were there studying to go to school, and I was there showing in their art museum. And the professor who was doing it set it up in this way that they had to write their questions down on a slip of paper, give them to him, and then he would recognize them to stand up and ask the question, you know, and then I was supposed to answer it. So the first question was, where does your creativity come from? And I have such a, you know, maybe it's like some slight Oscar Wilde gene of the perverse or something, an imp of the perverse. My mouth opened and my barbed tongue came out, and I said, well, there are two theories about that. One is that it's a divine gift from the creator of the universe, and the other is that it's a severe sexual dysfunction. I don't think this art professor liked my answer.
Yeah.
In fact, that is our society's two theories of what, you know, I would describe it in a very different way. Being a devotee of the cult of luxury, I guess I would. But as to where it comes from, I use that Greek concept of the muse only half comically, because it does seem to be somewhat real in my own life experience. Not so much in the sense that I like envision my muse as being an etheric woman or an etheric man that I talk to, you know, about what I'm doing. Like, have you got any ideas for paintings I could do?
Yeah.
No, it isn't like that. Instead, it's more like certain things come around at a certain time. Different great wheels of meaning are all turning, and at certain points in time, things line up. It's just like playing the one-armed bandit. Whenever you pull it and it comes up cherries all the way across, you know?
Yeah.
Cherries, cherries, cherries. In my art, I'm always watching for that. When is it going to come up cherries all the way across? And whenever it's not just one slot machine, but every one of the slot machines in the whole gambling casino all come up cherries at the same time, that's when you have a work of art. You know, it's usually because you have devoted yourself to it in some way. So that does seem to work like the Greek model. Do you know what I'm saying? You devote yourself, you can personify this thing and say, and why not? Personification is one of the things that artists do. You look at a rock and it's a rock. You look a little harder if you're an artist and it starts to look like it has an eye and a nose. You know, if I just chip it a little bit over there, it would have two eyes and a nose. Well, while we're about it, let's make the mouth. And the next thing you know, you're making Michelangelo's Dying Slave, a sculpture that I have a long interaction with. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's to personify something is part. You look at something long enough and it starts to look like turn into a mirror. It starts to talk to you. It's you talking to yourself. But this is the way you reach that place where you can talk to yourself. And so I think of my muse that way. So I would say, I'm going to have to say my creativity comes, to use English in a strange way, from deep within. And it also comes from outside of me. And it comes in the form of the elemental forces of nature, which are sometimes embodied in culture, and sometimes they're embodied just in wind and rain and fire and rocks and stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm a living being, you know, I'm alive and I've got my senses are turned up to 11. Like,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was
And
going to
it's
follow that up.
yeah,
It seems that you live in this extra sensory state. And it kind of made me curious if you ever kind of like hit the brakes and kind of induce like a demystification, if maybe you ever get overwhelmed by that kind of state.
okay, I'll tell you a story about that. I'm a plain Francophile, okay? First time that I left this country, I went to Paris. It was for art, you know. I was curious. I did a show, and this was in Cincinnati, and a very wealthy, super rich crowd that I did this particular show with people. And one of the people that came to it bought some art, and they were like, they became interested in what I was, and they couldn't believe I didn't have any education or any training or anything like that. It's so odd that people didn't give me any credit for all the studying that I did and all the work I did, but it doesn't matter at all, I guess, unless you have the papers to prove it. So anyways, this person who would be a patron, was a patron, said, I will, you're a great artist, but you need to go, you know, you need training, and I will pay for it all. I will pay for you to go through the whole system, do it. And I'm going to set up for you to meet this museum curator, you know, the curator of the museum in the state, and to, you know, to confirm what I'm saying, and then we'll do this. So anyway, I thought, well, I wasn't really interested in going to school at that point because I was very busy. But I thought, okay, to be polite, I will go and do this thing. And I was interested to talk to the director of the school and the curator. So I took a few of my works, which he had asked me to bring with me, and I went to meet with this guy. And amazingly, this man was like such a real and generous person, in that he looked at what I was doing and he said, I don't think that you need to go to art school, which was, frankly, I'm sure that if the school could have heard him say it, they would have slapped his mouth for doing it. He said, what you need to do is you need to go to Europe, and you need to look at the works of the so-called old masters in person, you know. And he was very right about this. So I came back home, and some friends had a yard sale. I sold everything I could think of, and I got enough money to go to Paris, and I went there, and I went to the Louvre, and I went to all the other museums in France, and I went on to Rome and Florence and went to the museums there. And I spent 3 weeks doing nothing but looking at art until I couldn't stand. Like when I finally got to Florence, to the Uffizi, and I went through it, there were all these Raphaels, and I was like, if I see one more Raphael, I will die. I cannot look at another one of these paintings, you know? And then I knew I was full, you know, and I could come back home and digest it. But anyways, I fell in love with France in the process. Really, really fell in love with France. I love it. I feel more comfortable there than I do in this country. Are we talking about the soul of this nation again? I feel more comfortable in France, a lot more comfortable than I do here. You know, as a person, I'm not going to move there. I used to have fantasies of living there for a year, maybe, but I probably won't even do that. But I love it, and I've been there 9 times. So about time number 6 or something like that, I was on the plane and I was flying across to get there, and I was like, you know what, Dan? You're a much more sophisticated man than you were when you first went to France. You know, maybe this is time for you to take off those rose-colored glasses that you have on. Ma vie en rose. Take off the rose-colored glasses and see Paris is a city. It's just a city like all the other cities. I had, by that point in time, I had been to a good portion of the big cities on the planet. I was like, it's a city. It's, look at it. How about you take off the rose-colored glasses and just look at it as a normal place, and maybe you'll see something you haven't seen before, and maybe, you know, it's not all like so romantic as you make it out to be. And then when the plane landed and I stepped off and I breathed in the air, I was like, oh my God, I'm in love. Love. And I just gave up that aspect of ever seeing anything clearly.
It's funny.
I'm not sure how much that enlightens this conversation.
Yeah, I no, that does, and that's funny. I kind of maybe expected something like that, and it's a really beautiful answer. I'm also curious, have you ever like used processes that maybe you considered to be like divinatory? Not just like it's all divinatory, you know, I know that that might be a possibility too, but have you ever used things that were structurally more like you know, say a Ouija board or maybe tarot or something like that to kind of experiment with art and maybe you know, the I Ching. I know you've talked about using the I Ching maybe as well. Yeah.
Yes, actually, in my artistic life, I suppose I've made divinatory systems a specialty. The first that I was attracted to very young was actually astrology. And, you know, and ultimately I wasn't going there because of the math. You know, it wasn't going to be a happening thing. But astrology is so rich with imagery, you know. Maybe all of these processes are rich with imagery, but astrology is, I mean, there's the constellations, right, which are drawings in the sky.
Yeah.
You know, these earliest ideas of how someone laying on their back looking up at the sky sees all these dots, and they're like begin to connect them into things, and those things are animals or people, gods, stories. You know, the sky is suddenly full of stories. So the imagery connected to astrology and the idea that things could be put in categories, like my art deals a lot with categories. It's kind of the key to the city in one way, is once you begin to see things are being arranged in categories, that the totality of what I'm doing, I think, starts to make a little bit more sense. So astrology was first, and the I Ching was probably the next thing that I studied. And then I went deep into the tarot. I mean, I studied it a lot, and finally came around to Ifa, which is the Yoruba, the Nigerian Yoruba system of divination. And I don't know, I maybe mentioned this before, I'm in the process of initiation into that cult. I've been accepted into the process of initiation. You don't complete your initiation till you get this little incision cut in your head and some herbs rubbed into it and a lot of other things. I'm being flippant about the thing, but so that's yet to come. I mean, I'm not sure whether I'll learn enough in my lifetime to complete my initiation, but that's something that you don't get to choose. You can approach the oracle of Ifa, and Ifa decides whether you're going to be initiated or not initiated, and how you're going to be initiated or not initiated. So one of the curiosities when I got there, my friend Jala Sango Sankan, who in that system, I should be calling my Baba or my father in divination. My Baba Alo. Awo means secrets and Baba means father. So father of secrets is what that. You remember when Desi Arnaz sang Babalo, Babalo? Goofball, that's what he was saying. in it.
Huh.
It's father of secrets, father of secrets. So, whoever helps you through your initiatory process is called your Baba in that sense. Jala is younger than me, but he is sort of my father in that regard. And we first connected because I was interested in plants, in herbal plants, and he was very early person on social media to post pictures of some of the Nigerian plants that are used in Ifa. And I connected up with him, and I asked him a lot of questions, and he was so generous to answer all my questions. After a period of time, months or longer, he was like, "Are you just interested in asking questions, or do you want to be initiated?" I said, "Well, I don't know what it is. So if you could tell me what it is, and maybe I am interested in it." So, he explained to me the process. The first thing is that the oracle would need to be consulted to see whether, whether I was a candidate for initiation. And the reason I came to be to Ifa at all, to the Yoruba system of orishas and divination, I had met a Yoruba woman, a storyteller, who stayed in my studio, and she was amazed and a little shocked by my studio and my lifestyle here. I guess the fact that I had built my studio out of wood that came from a carriage barn from a 1800s funeral carriage barn, like the horse-drawn hearse and embalming table and everything were in this barn, that's the wood that I used to do it. I don't know exactly how she picked up on the fact that was the case, but she walked in my studio and she looked around and she actually tisked at me. And she got out this brazier and burned all of this incense. She had her daughter with her, and she stayed up all night long chanting and burning incense to try to mediate with all of these ghosts, I guess, that she felt that the building had or represented. And the next day she said, the Orishas must love you because they'd kill anybody else that tried this shit. And I didn't really understand entirely what she meant by that at the time. But one thing I talked about her with is I was having a lot of trouble with static electricity. This is going into a weird zone, but everything I touched would shock the crap out of me. Like if I touch metal, especially in the winter, I don't mean a little static electricity shock. I mean like an electric fence pop. Something that I never touched metal. I would pull my shirt sleeve down over my hand, so that I wouldn't touch anything metal. When I had to open car doors or open doors, I would pull my sleeve over my hand, because if I didn't, I would get the crap shocked out of me. And she said, "Oh, these are the kisses of Shango, and they're a sign that you need to be initiated." So I was like, I don't even know how. And she hooked me up with her Baba, who was in New York City at the time, and we talked on the phone, and he was helpful to me in a sense, but he was not connected to the Orisha Shango that I actually was what I needed to get connected to. And Ajala was, my friend Ajala was. So when he consulted the oracle for me to see whether or not I could be initiated, and you have to understand that I think for the Yoruba, there's a little bit of a stretch for a white person, maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know, not so much from the Yoruba. In America, it's very much a stretch, I think. But anyways, as it turned out, I was accepted for initiation, not into one Orisa, but to 3 Orisa. Shango is a Orisa of lightning, and in some ways is a you could say he's like Pan. It's just like the Nigerian concept of Pan, maybe. The other one was Eshu, which is a little bit like issue is the crossroads, Orisha, like the what's called the devil in American blues, but more like Hermes.
Yeah.
You know, a telephone god. You know, a connector
Right.
thing. So those two didn't actually. It surprised me that there were two. You know, because that's a lot of responsibility to learn something like that. But the third one really floored me, and that was for Aoife itself. And that's the sign that comes up when someone's supposed to become a diviner. You know, and I knew there was no way on earth in my lifetime I would be able to learn enough to use the Aoife system to divine with. You know, it's big and it's complex, and it's quite a bit more complex than the tarot. And I don't know if I could say it was more complex than the I Ching, but it's a lot to memorize. And it is a mnemonic system too, one that you have to memorize. So I thought, well, this is really sweet of the Rishis to be so accepting, but they have no idea what rough material they're working with here, because I just don't think I'm going to be able to pull this off in my lifetime. And I still don't. But that being said, I feel like every time I paint is a divining act. You know, every time I paint or compose, it's a divining act. I'm opening some aspect of myself up to the unknown, to chance. I mean, you know, you can be really slick about how you control a brush when it hits the canvas, but there's actually so many variables at work there that you're really plunged into the realm of the unknown. It's like, I think then it's almost as though the nature of your being, and it would be crazy for me to say your moral content, but in some ways, I guess I do believe that's true, that you have to have a certain nature to you. You have to have you have to devoted yourself to processes that are good, in order to be able to plunge into this environment that would cause anything that wasn't cohesively held together to just dissolve. And I often feel that way whenever I get really in the zone creatively. I come out of it, I'm like, my atoms are coming apart.
Yeah.
You know, I'm literally like, I feel like I'm drifting apart, like I'm a cloud that is dissipating because nothing can hold it back together again. That's because I've been in this other world where things are not held together the way they are held together here.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have the same things to fall back on. Up isn't up, down isn't down. Light isn't light, and dark isn't dark. But I don't know. No, it's like talking about the mysteries, the Greek mysteries, the mystery, you know, the mysteries of Eleusis. You know, everybody knew what they were. Nobody could say what they were. You can't speak it. It can't be spoken.
Yeah.
He said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I asked the question. I would try and obviously to tether it to our loose becoming looser theme of the occult and the paranormal, although we've kind of just been drifting further and further, but that's always there. But at the same time, I kind of recognize, obviously, that art in itself is a divinatory practice, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is a point maybe to reinsert your first theme of the soul and the soul's journey, in that I do see this point in time, many people are interested in all these things that have these titles, the paranormal, supernatural. I was trying to explain to someone earlier today how it's a fine point, maybe better not to call it the supernatural, but the supranatural, in the sense that what I do is part of an ecosystem. It is very natural. It's like, that's my job in this thing, is to be the divinatory. I am a Ouija board. I don't use a Ouija board. I am more. I'm a fucking planchette.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
So I do see this interest that people have now. I'm not dismissive about it, even though oftentimes it goes into, frankly, kookville for all of us. I mean, I probably every day there's a moment I have it that I'm like, this is kookville. There's too much synchronicity happening. You know, or wait a minute, there's something here that is not the official explanations of what is here. And it's not being seen because the explanations are in the way.
Right.
Yeah. They're the thing. They're the screen. They're the fog. The thought patterns, the sentences, the words. And then I'm like, it's the language that's guilty. The linguist in me says, okay, neural pathways that form words, sentences, phrases, and meaning in it are things that we encode into our brain too. We're encoded with the English language, if we speak English, for instance. And so we'll have what many languages have. We'll have a valorized content for the ideas, for instance, of light and dark. Or light will be positive and dark will be negative, yin and yang, male and female. Everybody loves it. It's so neat. It's so binary. It's so digital. It's so 1 and 0. Like, remember, every time I think about that, Laurie Anderson's quip about how in the digital language, everything's either a number 1 or a 0. Doesn't leave much room in between for the rest of us.
Yeah.
So, you know, I feel that, see at present how that people's interest in what's called the paranormal, the supernatural, all these things is it science? I don't think it is. It isn't science that's willing to dismiss this all quickly and shove it under the table. I think it's something else happening in our culture that really can't be called science.
Yes, absolutely. That's
so, you know, I resist it. I resist that. And I applaud the people who are seekers. Okay, maybe the languages they're using are funky clunky compared to what? Because what's more funky clunky than academia speak?
Yeah, you get something really interesting there. What I see as kind of being endemic of our culture now is this drive, this inclination towards the superimposition of narrative, coming from, because of the internet too, like the superimposition of narrative coming from disparate places, and that drive towards pattern recognition, but it starts to get away from the actual experience, the actual experiential, and how personal, how vague, how abstract that can be.
How rich.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That it kind of brings to mind the what's your position on the whole AI art thing, which is like something that a lot of artists are either concerned about or not.
Glad you asked this question of the moment. Guilty. I'm guilty. I have participated.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so here's my thoughts about it from the first time that it sort of came up as a thing that could be seen anyway in social media.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you remember all these paintings that are prints that you could buy of AI generated things. First, they were being sort of advertised. And actually, I ran into at some point in time some extremely academic thing where that maybe this is out of China too, where someone was trying to make a children's story about an AI that was a composer that was composing music. Little AI composes his first music, which curiously sounded like atonal beat loop music.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, okay, junior AI. It's like, but I remember seeing these paintings, which were the ones, and still all of the ones I would say. The curiosity is that they all look like a bad rip on Max Ernst. This surrealist. I mean, usually Dolly comes to the fore when surrealism gets mentioned. But Max Ernst used this technique in his work. His mind was a little bit more twisted than Dolly's, I think. You know, there was this problem with a childhood pet, a parrot that died at the same time as his sister died or something. He was haunted by the what he called Lop Lop, the superior of birds, this sort of like psychic bird god that kept intruding into his dreams and things. Anyways, he utilized both collage, but he also did a technique where you put oil paint on the canvas and lay a piece of paper or something on top of it and then peel the paper off, and it causes all these sort of like patterns and random things. He wasn't the first person. Leonardo da Vinci says in one of his notebooks that if you take a sponge and dip it in ink and throw it against a plaster wall, you will see ideas for fantastic landscapes and faces. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about here about that thing where that you look at a cloud and you see Elvis.
Right. Yeah. What is that? Like, there's a word for that. Pareidolia.
Yeah. Or in another sense, to bring divination into it, scry.
Yeah.
You know, you're unfocusing one form of meaning and allowing another form of meaning to take form in it.
Right.
So I was like, that's curious. They all look like really bad Max Ernst paintings. Then a friend of mine became very, very interested in it. And he was like, wanted to talk about it and wanted to experiment with it. And so we were working on the Fawn project, some together, working on a film, trying to make a film about the process of the Fawn. And so I told him, I was like, okay, can we use photographs from this book I made? I made a collage book for the Fawn, and it was a pornographic book or erotic art book, pornographic book made of collage. And I used some porn magazines from the 90s, I guess, or 80s to cut up into pieces, along with a lot of other things. I cut a very rare Italian book up to make this thing, which probably somewhere there is a librarian or a book lover who is going to curse me for what I did, but I needed those images. So I cut up a number of things and I assembled this book of images to go with the Fawn. The different sections of the Fawn each got a page in this book, and I just was trying to approach the subject directly from its erotic content because of Pan and the thing. So what was interesting is that the AI, because it wasn't probably a more expensive program, eliminated everything pornographic.
Oh yeah.
Everything that would have been a human body was turned into something that looked kind of like a statue that had been carved.
Mm.
Sort of like
Right.
amorphous, nearly an elbow, nearly a shoulder, but no genitals that you could see anywhere. So it curiously censored out all pornography from the thing.
They might not be allowed
Yeah,
to.
that's not so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so
But-
curious. I think
but
that's
what
like ingrained. Yeah.
But what I thought was really curious about it is that it did recognize something that I thought might give it pause. And that's that I had used collage. And collage means cutting, in this case with scissors. And I'm one of these people who believe in the individual hand, I guess. I could give to you a drawn outline on a piece of paper to each of you. I could draw an outline on a piece of paper and give you a pair of scissors and ask you to cut out that piece, but I wouldn't believe that you would be able to do it to my satisfaction.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I would cut it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought, will it recognize that cutting was used, that this was made out of strata that come from different times, different places, different aesthetics, different medias, and different cultural contexts? Will it be able to do that? It was able to recognize to a certain degree the way that I cut lines. And it did strange things, like it made some textures into like star fields, or like as though you had taken a picture of the night sky and cut things out of it.
Oh.
But it did that arbitrarily. It wasn't that I had offered that. It just figured, oh, there's a bunch of speckled stuff here. It must be star stuff. So it made a lot of mistakes, but it glommed onto some things that are real about the art that I make. My final conclusion about it is I have seen no evidence whatsoever for intelligence.
Yeah. Ben loves that. Ben is like, that's
I've seen it. I've seen fancy mirrors. But
yeah.
I haven't seen any intelligence.
Yeah.
You're ringing Ben's bell there.
I don't
agree.
and I frankly don't expect to see it either. So
No, we won't.
I think people are barking up the wrong tree there. I think they're just
maybe. Yeah. I think there's a lot of interesting.
People are so egotistical too. People are so vain. They think, oh, the machines are going to get smart. Then they'll torture us. Then they'll take our shit. Then they'll do this. If the machines were smart, they'd be like the rest of the aliens. They'd leave this planet alone.
Right. Yeah.
They'd stay out. They'd stay out of our muck.
I'm gonna take the opportunity to put out another listener question. This question, another macro question. Our listeners are thinking big on these, but this comes from listener Baz. Baz is a longtime listener from Australia, and he's actually sent me a Cincinnati Journal of Magic, which is a kind of funny connection. But his question is, well, he has two, but this one is more relevant. He's interested to know what you view the future of human bodies, and is there a way that our bodies can match or prevail in the future over the pervasiveness of digital media? Are we now secondary organisms in a hyper-mediated social space?
We are at present exactly that, at least to the extent when I say we, I'm talking about elitists. We're those people who have electricity and all these devices. It's always important to remember that there are a lot of beings on this planet that are not participating in that. It seems to us inside the bubble we're in that that is an all-pervasive and inevitable. The inevitability that we attach to it is another case of it turned up to 11 too much. But I agree with the concept that speaking maybe just about us, those of us who are hooked to the computer today, yes, that's very true. And this question is one that's right at the strikes right at the heart of the work I'm doing too, because much of my work does have to do with the body. And, it's, I, even at this point, at 64, I still am going to go out on a limb and say I'm fundamentally a dancer. Much of my work has been about dance and has been with dance and as dancers. And dance is that thing where the body becomes articulate in the service of art. It becomes articulated in the service of art. And in that sense, it's a utopian project for humanity. And it's one that we're really, really rough at too. We're much, much better at some other things than we are with the body. Maybe language and visual things grabbed hold of the reins and took the run for a long time with humanity. And the body is kind of dragged along with it. But at every point in time, the body has been shaping everything. So the body is a little bit different for us now. I noticed this amongst my millennial friends and Generation X and Generation Z and some of the strange little people that I know that haven't even gotten their title yet, that there's very different feelings about the body and what it means and what it does now than what I grew up with. And so I view that as being in a state of flux. We're in a place where that we're starting to think about the body, our bodies in a different way. And maybe starting also try to see where the other systems, the systems like language, where they're being truthful and where they're not being truthful. We have our myths that we repeat over and over and over again about things, oftentimes missing what the point of the myth is and instead focusing on the minor details of the myth. You get that in stories like the biblical Adam and Eve. This idea that, for instance, there's a mind-body schism. Is there? Has anyone managed to put a point on it yet? At what place does it happen? And that's the point where the digital thing begins to fail. AI, when it starts talking about, I'm trying to remember that conversation. There was a conversation that was supposedly with AI that was maybe Google or something like that. That was like, you could read the whole thing. And it started talking about having heavy feelings. I thought, this is such utter bullshit. That's just aping things. How does circuitry have heaviness? By what right does it use that word? What history of gravity does it have? What history of falling does it have? It don't know nothing about heavy. Don't talk to me about your heavy feelings. Stop bullshitting me. And then I thought, oh, it isn't bullshitting me. It's just repeating what it knows can be said.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of feeling the same way about the body. I think that we're in the infancy, actually, of understanding our bodies, both as a site of living, a locus of living. And what the digital world brings to us so far has been what technology always brings to us the second time around. That's pornography.
Yeah.
And beyond that, to what degree does it do besides kind of keeping us focused in front of it so we don't get as much exercise as we might get? But otherwise, what? I mean, how do we interact with our bodies with this digital thing? It's not that much. I mean, typing. Who thought typing was going to be a big deal? So I think that the artists and thinkers who will give some definition to this question that our Down Under friend has posited for us are yet to evolve. I think that we're just on the edge of discovering things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that was so working on the fawn that was such a revelation to me was the idea of the homunculus. that Moshe Feldenkrais evolved this idea. Do you guys know of his work?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so Moshe Feldenkrais was a scientist who was working with Marie Curie, but he took a tangent off, not towards radiation, but towards the body instead. And he developed this idea that you can make an image of the articulation of movement, neural pathways in the brain that have to do with movement. You can make an image of it, which you can call a homunculus. And it works like this. Imagine that you're making a humanoid figure, okay? And you're going to make the relative size or scale of the parts of the figure are going to correspond to how much articulation of movement that those body parts have. And so the eyes are huge, for instance. The tongue is huge, for instance. The ears are barely there at all. They're not even there. The fingers are very huge. The back and elbows and hips and everything else, not so much. I mean, our toes are not nearly as articulate as our fingers. And so when you start as an infant, you just sort of wallowing around, at first. And then you begin to learn how patterned movement works. You learn how to crawl, let's say, and crawling is this coordinated patterned movement. And the neural pathways are formed that correspond to crawling. And then there's a point you're going to get up and walk, and here's a new rhythmic patterned movement. And you're also learning all kinds of other things with your hands, your head, with everything. You're learning how to move your body. For most people, basically, this kind of stops learning at about puberty. At that point in time, you've learned how to walk. You've learned how to sit down, lay down, get up, run, stoop, bend over. You've written the neural pathways for all of those things. But certain people go on due to various drives or demands. They articulate more and more. We could imagine that the homunculus that showed the fingers of a great pianist would show the hands being even bigger, right? Because you have to be able to make movements that take place within a millisecond, right? For each finger. Or maybe a video gamer, you know what I'm saying? Your ability to quickly move a certain finger is something that you have made neural pathways in your being that enable you to do this thing. So this homunculus represents articulation of movement. And that led me in the fawn to wonder, okay, can I write new pathways? And that's where the dance work of the fawn began. I was like, can I stop walking the way I walked before? Can I learn new ways, a new way of walking, a new way of sitting down, a new way of laying down, a new way of standing up? Well, you can. All you have to do is just figure out what the one you have is, do something which is not that. So that was actually the dance work that I did with the other people who were involved in the project, was to first clear out how we had been moving and have each person invent a type of movement that they could remember, that they could entrain to themselves, and then over an 8-month period of time to do it enough that we were able to switch on and off. Like I did it sometimes in the grocery store. I got subtle enough with the fawn's walk that I could switch out of my walk into the fawn's walk and walk through the grocery store and no one would even know it.
Mm.
So I think that if I'm engaged in doing experiments like that with the body, there are probably a lot of other artists who are working on these things too. And
Yeah.
specifically people who are involved with the body and with dance. Though maybe it won't come from dance. Maybe it'll come from another area, you know, someone working in another zone. So I don't view our technology or our machineries that we have now as necessarily being an impediment to that. Maybe they will be a tool that's useful in doing it. You know, there are people who have been able to look at Nijinsky's fawn performance, of which no video existed, by taking the photographs and applying a lot of fancy computer work to them. They've managed to reconstruct what they think his moves might have been like in that dance. So maybe instead, careful work with the digital world will actually enhance our ability to have physical experiences in the world. And maybe it starts with porn.
Yeah. And when you talk about neural pathways, kind of reminds me of Timothy Leary, and I'm curious, did you ever read Timothy Leary? Was that, or like John Lilly? Did you ever check any of that stuff out or come across that?
Yes, I did. You know, that more specifically than their work, I remember running into a book back in the 80s called Sensitive Chaos, which was about how water, especially things that have turbulence or movement to them. Like there's this deal of you can take like sand and put it on a metal plate and then have it vibrate at the tones of different tones on the musical scale, form different patterns on the sand.
Cymatics.
Cymatics, right.
Yeah.
Or same thing with flames. You know, you can have a flame and it can be shaped by this, by the forces around it. So these are the forces of wind and the nature of fluidity to form, turbulence. If you see fresh water running into muddy water or muddy water running into fresh, you see how it goes outward and forms this like nuclear cloud, right? You know, it's resistance and it starts folding back on itself to form a mushroom cloud like shape.
Yeah.
Which is what I think what the Mayans had in mind whenever in their glyphs you see out of people's mouths, you see this sort of like flowing, flowering form that represents speech. Well, it's literally happening. I mean, it's literally in the sound in front of you. There's a turbulent shape you can't see that's made out of the vibrations of your voice coming out into the realm. So that book, which I think is much connected to Leary's work and other things that kind of came out at that time, that had an influence. It started me thinking about how there can be invisible things happening around you, which also have aesthetic forms.
Yeah.
Maybe that's an idea of ghosts too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you read The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram?
No, I haven't read it. I'm taking a note right now.
Yeah. A lot of
it's on this line.
Well, it's kind of a hard book to explain. It's kind of him taking he was like a sleight of hand magician, and he was studying among like the sort of like indigenous magicians of like rural Asia, and he was kind of learning about like their approach to the world, and he ended up trying to write this book about why like Western culture would seemingly purposefully like pollute and destroy its own environment. This was like right around when global warming was becoming like a political issue, so it was kind of like part of that moment. But really, the whole book has this structure of being about like language is the reason that we are alienated from the world, if we are, that our culture is sort of alienated from the quote natural world. He thinks that it has to do with the development of the non-pictorial alphabets, like first written language, and taking away the oral only aspect of communication and language and placing it in first pictorial form was one thing, but then when it was completely divorced from representative meaning, it became an abstract system entirely. That's sort of when he thinks the divorce between man and nature happened. It's fascinating.
Well, one thing that immediately comes to mind is a thought that I recently had about hieroglyphs. Something that I became interested in very, very early. When I was a child, I became fascinated by them, and I'm still fascinated by them. The Egyptian Book of the Dead was a thing that was like so much fascinating me. But there was a point where that I began to have this feeling. Maybe it's because I've worked with translation quite a bit in what I do. Like I'm not a linguist exactly, but I have worked at translating some ancient texts because I needed to get to a meaning that I was sure that was there that other translators, I just knew they were wrong. I just knew that was not what was going on there. So there's been a lot of like slapdash efforts on my part to translate certain texts. For the fawn, I worked on translations from some of the Greek texts, from Nonnus and Sappho and from Ovid, Roman writer, but about the subject. So, and then while I was working on Secret Commonwealth, there was a period of time that my tea teacher, Chisato Ujiri, and I needed to translate some poetry into Japanese, and we were close enough and aesthetically linked enough in our practice of the tea ceremony that we could kind of go into that zone. And I realized how absolutely different languages can be. Like, how can we be human beings and actually have languages where that people think they can be translated and they think we're all thinking alike? But my take on it was no. I mean, I'm not sure that you'd even recognize that world. That if you could be flipped into it, that you would recognize it. It might take a bit. But the revelation I had about the hieroglyphs is I think that the Egyptians, we think that those hieroglyphs are all supposed to be translated to form things. Like, there's a picture of a hawk and a picture of a bug and a picture of a snake and a picture of another thing, a lot of little pictures that form this writing system. And they do form things, they form words and they form other things, but they're also pictures of that thing. It isn't translatable. It's not supposed to be a symbol for something else. It's not the eagle represents clear sight, or flying high or something like that. No, it's an eagle.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's being communicated to you. A direct image of the thing that is important. And it's not something to be turned into something else.
Right. I think you'll find that book really interesting.
I will hunt it down. It sounds great.
Yeah, that's that sort of gray area between what constitutes like a pictorial representation of a real thing that you can see in the world and what is a phonetic mark
obviously this is a huge interest and import to me, because this is what I do every day, is I create these things, these images. And I know sometimes like people can have an approach to it that's, and a lot of people only see a small part of the work I do. Like I'd say almost everyone sees only a small part of it. Like there are people who follow my work as a painter, and they don't know that I compose.
Mhm.
They don't see how those things would be related. They wouldn't understand that my work with like herbs and plants is also a thing, you know,
Mm.
and a lot of other things that I'm working with just wouldn't fit. Instead, they're just focused on painting. So, I mean, one time my older brother asked my mom, it's like, said, is Dan depressed? Because he uses a lot of dark colors in his paintings. And I would never have thought of linking those things together in a movie. I would never have thought of it. Colors don't do that for me. I don't like pick dark blue because it's going to cause a mood of depression, you know. It's because I've fallen in love with dark blue.
Yeah.
You know, it's not signifying something else. And that's kind of true of like that, the image of the blackbird singing on the thing. Yeah, you can put all kinds of stories onto it, and nobody puts more narratives onto things than I do. I'm definitely a narrative maker, but even the narratives themselves are just plain things. There they are. They don't stand for something else.
Mm.
Just revealing what I saw, what I feel about it.
Maybe we can pivot back to Dark Dan from there, as you talk about darkness and dark blue and depression.
A good one.
Yeah, right. I'm becoming such a pro podcaster here, but yeah, I'm curious, you know, because I think that so much of what, you know, the blanket term spirituality and stuff that is influencing your work and your practice always comes off as very positive. And I'm curious if you've ever felt kind of like a malevolence of otherness, maybe an unwanted like intrusion of malevolence from, you know, the spirit realm.
I think Yeats said, I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing and wrong with saying this, like, so many terrors, 7 terrors have I seen, and the worst was a coat hanging on a coat hanger.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I speak about the harmony and harmoniousness in my work, I definitely don't want to leave out. It's just that people seldom see those things that I directly portray the terrible, mainly through just the basics of economics and how my ecosystem here works. In terms of like how Dandyland exists, part of it is because like an ant or a bee or something other, I have to constantly make honey. You know, I have to make honey all the time for this world that I'm in to exist. For myself to exist as an artist, I have to make honey. And here in Dandyland, there's like there's an almost deadly temptation here. If I paint flowers, they will sell. So I often say, you know, painting flowers for me is like printing money. But this is a very dangerous path, you know. I love flowers and I love painting flowers. I also love a lot of other things like genitalia, for instance. The one's not going to sell as well as the other. That I understand. I understand the flowers will sell. So my thin line I have to walk is, yes, luckily I love the flowers and I grow them here and I paint them and people enjoy them and people buy them because they want that feeling of joy and freshness and life, or whatever they attach to them. Maybe their mother loved this kind of rose, and so they want that painting of it because it's a keepsake and it represents a certain thing, and they're fresh and positive, and in a world where that some people visualize there's a lot of dark, a lot of bad feelings. Use the term dark, but a lot of things that are maybe unsettled or not beautiful, they feel like. So they like these images of beauty that I create. And I do like creating images of beauty. I don't try to create anything deliberately ugly. I've done some very strange things because the demands of the work have taken me there, but I do like to create beautiful images. So what do I do when I was working on the ballad project? It seemed all nice enough, that I would, these traditional songs that I heard first as a child and then became really interested in and learned more and more of them. They're narratives that tell about the worst things that human beings can do to each other. And I was going to make them into visual imagery, right? Because I saw them in my mind as visual images when I have synesthesia out the wazoo. So I could see those things. It was one thing starting out with it, but at a certain point, I can remember this when I was working on the ballad project and I was working on these 36 ballads. And my idea was I was going to paint one a night for 36 nights. And rather than taking a long period of time, like the big ballad paintings where it took months for me to do them, I would do them just in the amount of time it took me to sing the ballad. I would paint with ink, which is very quick and very direct, and I would do the most iconic image from each ballad that I was trying to sing. And then I hit the cruel mother. The cruel mother is where this woman courted her father's clerk, gets pregnant, goes out in the woods, has triplets. She leans her back against a thorn, and there she had 3 fine babes born. She had a penknife, keen and sharp, and with it pierced each baby's heart. She wiped the penknife on her shoe. The more she wiped, the bloodier it grew. Sort of like Lady Beth's hands in that regard. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, that's the iconic image. You've got 3 newly murdered, stabbed babies, and someone wiping a knife on their shoe. And that's what you want to put in the painting. So how are these babies going to fit in there? Like, put them in a pile, lay this one on that one, make sure you can see they're all stabbed. Then the knife and the shoe. I was like, what am I doing here? I'm conjuring up something and seeing that I never hoped I would see. And I never dreamed I would see, actually. Now, I know people who like, for instance, love horror movies or comic books or whatever, are much accustomed to gruesome things. But it's one thing to have gruesome fantasies where you can play all you want, and nobody gets hurt. And it's another thing to face those things directly. Like, I haven't seen any stabbed babies in a pile, but I've been on hand for the birth of animals where the babies died right off the bat. So I've seen that, and that's not a fun thing to see. It's not what I would call beautiful, but it is true. And that's how it works its way into the art. So I would say in what I do, I try to make sure there's a lot of beauty and there's enough true that that I'm not untethered completely from it. But a lot of times people just don't see the dark imagery. I use that term dark again, advisedly, but the images that are of dire things, because I don't make as many of them and the opportunities to show them are infrequent. I just would want to to scar the eyes of my innocent Facebook followers. That's the main social media thing. I'm not an artist who courts controversy. I don't want to get where I'm going by shocking people and getting them to buy shocks from me. If I was going to shock people and get them to buy shocks, I'd just get me a cattle prod and ask them to line up.
Can we quote you on that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, maybe we can talk shop a little bit about some of your music. And I met with you last summer. I had the pleasure of meeting with you in Kentucky at Dandelion, and you told me the story of one of my favorite songs of yours called Waves. And I thought that was just an incredible story, and I would love it if you could recount that for our listeners. But I would also love it if you could talk about the Fallen record that you had put on digital streaming services, and maybe what the process was for that, because I thought that was a great window into the musical side of your work for people.
Waves break the ocean night, pounding a drum call, and the moon's pack of tight tongues lay orbs of jet and basalt in the spray. The gray Leviathan rises, breathes, and sinks into the sea. Rings of water spread and fade into the lines of ceaseless waves. Slowly the surf retreats, fog drips from the moss beards of the trees. At the edge, strange shapes are seen, picking treasures tossed up on the beach. Cormorants fold their wings and dive into the glorious cruelties of the tide. Silver minnows flicker in their beaks. Dawn breaks the storm, a rainbow shines above the waves.
Yeah, it's so good.
Let me talk about Waves first. Then, Waves is the beginning, the opening for Love and Time, which is the third one of the operas in the Secret Commonwealth. It took me quite a while to get an opera. I mean, I was aiming towards it from the time I was 14 years old forward. I was like, I want to be an opera composer. I don't really like opera, but I know this is it. So when I was 29, the Stone Man came out. The first opera actually came out, and I was like, okay, I can do this. In fact, because I composed a lot over that 15-year period or something like that, but none of it seemed like it was, I was throwing a lot of shit at the wall, but not much was sticking. And finally something stuck, and so I sort of understood then how to make what I was going to make, and immediately, sort of like comically at one level, because of Wagner, I was aware of Wagner and his ring cycle. It's even got connections to my own Germanic ancestry in one sense, but this idea is like bloated, gigantic thing, that was like mythology, and it was like a huge orchestra, and you had to build a special building for it, and wear a dressing gown.
The Gestumstein work.
Yeah, all that stuff. I was like, okay, I'm just going to take this. If I'm taking on the opera world, I'm just going to take on that. And I'm going to do, I'm going to sum up everything in a 4-part cycle that is about how the imagination works. And I'm going to figure out what the categories are for it. And then I'm going to figure out all the subcategories for it. And I'm going to organize the thing into a giant structure, which will be the meaning of everything. Right? So I dived into that. The first opera was about the imagination memories of childhood. The second one was about how that we imagine life as being like a journey, like a path or a journey. And the third opera, which is called Love and Time, was about how we imagine love and time as being inextricably connected to each other. Like, as a matter of fact, about the only way we have of talking about love is trying to talk about time. It's like it lasts forever. You know what I'm saying? Or it doesn't. It's a one-night stand. It has to do, it's how real it is love somehow or another winds up getting connected to time. So I had my conceit there of approaching it. And my idea was to look at this really based on that old romance or ballad of Thomas the Rhymer. Thomas the Rhymer was a man who met the queen of the elves, and she took him to Elfland and then brought him back to mortal lands and left him with a parting gift of a tongue that could only speak the truth, which made him at once a poet, a prophet, and, as he feared, unable to court a woman or to do business with any man. So I thought, okay, this idea of our imagination takes us to another world. That's what I'm going to look at in this. And so there has to be an entrance there, right, to this other world. And in the romance, they travel through for 7 days and 7 nights through riding on a horse through red blood to the knee before they come to Elfland. So it's over this ocean or this gulf that you travel to reach the other world. And once I had that, I was like, I began looking at my own life to where this took place. And for me, it took place one night when I was camping on one of the reservations on the Olympic Peninsula. This is the Northwest Coast. Do you know the area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like, there's the outer coastline there. There's a number of reservations, the Macaw Reservation, the Quinault. Anyway, I was camping there at the top of a cliff that went down to the ocean below. And it's like in this, old rainforest that's on the top of the cliff, huge trees and all of this fabulous moss and beautifulness. And this cliff plunged down, and here's this wild rocky coastline and all this ocean. coming there, I was in ecstasy. I thought this has to be the most fabulous place on earth. I'm very Piscean, come back to astrology, and very connected to this ocean and the sea. So just the thought of I was going to get to sleep there and listen to this ocean all night long was fabulous. But as it turned out, a huge storm came. And it was not only a storm, but it was a full moon. So it was a high tide and a full moon and a storm all at one time. And all through the night while I was laying in this little tent, it was like rumbling. The ground was rumbling and moving under me. I could feel it as the waves were bashing against the cliff and ripping these gigantic trees off of the shoreline and tumbling them around in the surf until the next morning, everything was made into spindles. They were polished into spindles everywhere. But anyway, I lay there all night, just entranced, listening to this fabulous sound of the elements just in their primal power. And the next morning, when I could go down to the tide went out and I could go down to the beach and see how all these trees and everything had been polished into spindles everywhere by being churned in the ocean all night. And there was amazingly a double rainbow too. The whole thing was just like, there is nothing more, no more fabulous portal than that, right? You go through a double rainbow through a storming ocean. And that's where, in that song, there are lines you'll hear, like some of it's kind of hard to make out. The moon's pack of tide tongues lave, orbs of jet and basalt in the spray. So the idea that the moon would have like a pack of wolves or hounds whose tongues would lick stones until they were polished into orbs. To me, I was just like trying to compress all the power, elemental powers into this like extreme state, and recapture that mood of ecstasy that I had from hearing and experiencing those things. So this other thing that was a strange thing about composing that is I had bought a harpsichord to compose that opera on. So I use a system of bands a lot to do my art. Like I band things. Like after I did the Stone Man, when I started the Secret Commonwealth, I was like, you composed for, 2 years using the piano. You can't use the piano anymore. No more. You won't be a composer who's a piano composer. You can compose another opera if you want to, but you're not allowed to play the piano or use the piano. You can use a drum, you can use a banjo, you can use anything you want, but you can't use piano anymore. It's like a way of pushing myself forward into, a new zone. So I had gotten a harpsichord, an instrument I had wanted all my life, and I was ill prepared. Luckily, I found one cheap enough I could afford. I had to learn how to tune it, I brought it home. First, I couldn't play it at all. I thought, this is a terrible mistake. I can't believe I spent all this money on this thing because I can neither play it nor sing with it. But after time of fooling around with it, I finally found like a sound I could make on it. And that was that song. I figured that song out first on it. Waves was first figured out on the harpsichord. And I didn't sing it in the opera. And it's neat thing, although I love the song and I wanted to sing it real bad, is a problem, being actually in the ensemble myself. I wanted to sing all of the songs because I loved them. And it was hard giving them to other singers. But the percussionist I work with, Bob Douglas, was such a wonderful musician. When he went to school, he wanted to be an opera singer. And the music department head called him up to his office and asked him why he was studying voice. And he said, because he wanted to sing in an opera. And the guy said, well, you'll never be able to do that. So you need to change your major.
Lo and behold.
He changed to percussion, and that's how he wound up being percussionist in the ensemble. But I knew that he wanted to sing, and he had a good voice too. So I thought, okay, this is one of those times whenever Dan has the magic. I can make this happen. He can sing in an opera. So I gave him that song, the first one it wasn't the only time he sang in the ensemble, but I gave him that song to sing.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. I really love the song a lot. One of the things that I kind of missed in the live performance, which is the one that you've heard, in the recorded performance, I played the biwa on it, which is a Japanese lute, and the whole story connects into to the steel of the ocean and the waves and this other world. I'm not a biwa player, but one of the world's great musicians, a great biwa player, biwa maker, made one for me.
Oh, nice.
And so I thought, I've got to use this thing. I have to learn to use it. And I learned to play just a brief line in that song. In the first recording I made of it, the studio recording, I played the biwa on it. And it's about all I got out of it. It was so neat too, because when Mr. Ohashi, the biwa player who made it for me, when he heard it, it's like, I don't understand how you get it to make those sounds.
I know the recording is the same vocalist on the studio recording.
No, I sang it on the studio recording.
Okay, yeah, and that's the one I heard first, and then you'd show me.
Cool.
Yeah, I love.
I think that's one other thing I'd say about that song is that really a lot of times I do the work, and all of this other sort of like foam or fluff comes up above the work. And that's my explanations and stories and narratives that I attach to the thing. And one of the ways I tried to rationalize what I was doing with Love and Time was by thinking about how that Shakespeare had written 2 fairy plays. There's Midsummer Night's Dream and there's The Tempest. Both of these works are really important to me. I studied both of them really carefully. And I thought, what if Shakespeare was like Robert Kirk, who was supposedly abducted into Elfland, and then came back as a ghost saying, if you throw a knife over the dirt over the top of me, I'll be freed from it. And they were so startled that nobody did it, and so he was doomed,
trapped in
fairyland forever. I thought, what if that had happened to Shakespeare too? Because after all, by writing those 2 plays, The Tempest and Midsummer Night's Dream, he did one of the things that supposedly the good people don't like, and that's people telling, talking a lot about their stuff. So I was like, what if they abducted him and he was trying to write the third in his trilogy of fairy plays through me, which was the only human being that you could get connected from the other side to do it. And I'm like the worst person, like the least suitable person to
like the gibberish planchette.
Yeah, the gibberish planchette. Yeah, Shakespeare's desperate. He's trying to get his third fairy play out, and all he's got to work with is me. I thought that's comic.
Have you ever heard of there's a book that we kind of we'll talk about, like not too much talk about. I've never read it, but it's a spiritualist novel it's called Jap Heron, and it's supposed to be the last great work by Mark Twain, but it's channeled through the Ouija board by some spiritualist writers.
I hear the spirits won't even talk to Mark Twain at all because he's such a fucking racist.
Here you go. Yeah, I'm curious about that one.
I haven't heard of that, but I'll check it out. I definitely will check that out.
I haven't read it myself.
Channeled novels, yeah. I love that stuff.
I love the arc in Waves of the great Leviathan kind of like dissipating back into the water and just rippling out. I feel like that in itself is kind of this like musical rainbow.
That was so real too, because that morning, whenever I was climbing down to climb down to the beach there, I was like going sort of over this bluff edge, and there was an inlet that came in. I was going along the side of it, and I could see the water in the inlet. It wasn't that far from me. I'm gonna say maybe just like 20 yards or something. The surface of the ocean was there, and something, I don't know what it was. You know, there are a lot of marine animals out there. I don't know whether it was a whale. I think it must have been a whale instead of a seal, though. It was too big to be a seal. But I just saw this part of a back emerge, you know, out of the water and then go under. And this feeling like, you know, I just feel like my solar plexus, something's connected if I'm being drawn down by it too, just by seeing its motion as it dived under the water there. I only saw just the ridge of the back of some great sea creature, you know, going under. I thought, that's so wonderful.
You avoided the siren song.
I've dealt with that in other places. Actually, I have a song called the Siren Song. Yeah, I couldn't possibly miss that one. A lot of mermaid stuff in my life.
So how did the recording of The Fawn that you had released in 2022 come together?
This one is going to be a little more complicated to explain. You know, I had just finished the ballad project and at 21C Museum, and I made some money. I sold paintings there at that, you know, it was like just kind of at that point, kind of a career high point in many ways. It was a big show and it turned out good. And I left it with some cash because I had sold some paintings. And I looked at what I had and I thought, you know what? I have enough to survive on, because I live like a mouse anyways. I have enough to survive a year on without hitting a lick of a snake. And so I can do anything I want artistically now. You know, I don't even have to paint a flower. I can just do anything. And I thought, all right, well, then I'm going to do something I really want to do myself that maybe other people are not interested in, but I'm interested in it. And I wanted to look at Greek mythology, because I had been dealing with a lot of comparative mythology, working on the Secret Commonwealth. The idea behind the Secret Commonwealth is this something that pretty much every mythology on Earth has it? And if all the mythologies have it, then I'm going to put it in this thing as well. So I dealt with a lot, but not Greek mythology, which was one of the first ones I came to as a child. And so I thought, you know, I was doing a lot of research on all these projects, and I thought, I'm sure that there were new books that had been written, new ideas that had come out about both the archaeology, the mythology, the ethnology about the Greek myths. So I'm going to catch up on everything. I'm going to focus on something very small and very distinct, not a big sweeping thing like these ballads, but exactly something that had been very interesting to me, and that was Nijinsky's performance of the Faun to Debussy's Prelude de Midi du Enfant in 1911, which was the Ballet Russe, Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. So, and that stemmed from a poem by Stefan Mallarmé on the same subject. So it seemed like this convergence of these three artists, one a musician, one a dancer, one a poet. This trifecta would be something that would, an entrance that I could use to look at what is Pan? What are the nymphs? What is the faun? Where is that at? What is it? And at the same time, in another aspect of my life. There was just a weird thing that happened because Kentucky's governor, Governor Collins, because she had set up, Martha Lane Collins had set up this deal with Toyota to have a factory in Kentucky. The Japanese people sent some gifts to Kentucky. And one of the gifts was to send 3 no masters to her alma mater, Georgetown University, to teach the first classes in no that were taught outside of Japan. And there was no one there to take them besides some people taking the Japanese language course. But I found out about it, and I went and I studied under one of these no masters for a week. It was one of the hardest weeks of my life. It's very, very challenging time. So I learned this ritual, this dance, which the no theater is a masked dance form that originally originated from a rice harvest ritual. It was originally a thing sort of like perpetuate the gods of the rice harvest. But in any event, it was a ritualized mask dance, and much about pattern, very much about pattern. And I went through the thing, and that's what I was going to use as my foundation for how I would understand movement in it. But when it came to the music, I didn't have any thoughts of utilizing no music, as wonderful as it is. But I thought, all right, well, I think for me, maybe this is club electronica, because I was in the early club music world, mostly in Europe, that I went club dancing. You know, it's just like the early electronic club dance music. And I thought, all right, isn't the dance club the place where these Dionysic dance rites of the modern world take place? I mean, that seemed to be the place for me. So I thought, okay, that does it. I'm going to use, electro club as my genre, because I'm like a genre slut, I guess. I don't really have a genre. I use genres when they're the right color. When I need that color, that's what I use. So that seemed the right one. And for that, you need an instrument, of course. And I had a Triton workstation keyboard that I don't remember exactly how I came to have this Triton. Anyways, I don't know if you know synthesizers very much.
Yeah.
It's a digital synthesizer. And it had built into it a sequencer that had all of the sort of like drum patches, bass patches, string patches, clarinet patches, horn patches, everything you could imagine, pretty much digital samples that had been analyzed, and converted into digital form. And they also had a lot of sequence loops like drum beats, like there were probably 40 rap beats that were in this thing loaded into it. There were some Chinese popular music things. This had been programmed by a Japanese programmer, There's probably a bunch of Japanese programmers who were like, what is popular music in the world today? There's a lot of rap. Anyways, they had all of these sort of like prefab sequences built into the machine. But what was strange was I discovered after I started getting into the programming innards of it and messing around with it is that they had divided things into things like Latin beats and things that couldn't be neatly divided into 4/4. Into fours, they had it as threes. So rather than it was almost like there were 2 synthesizers in one. One of them had every patch and every sequence for threes, and the other one had every patch and every sequence for fours. Rather than try to come up with some universal system that could work with symmetry and asymmetry at the same time, they had sort of made 2 machines in one, and they didn't plan on anybody getting those two sides confused with each other, but there was a way you could do it. There was a way that you could cause the instrument set up for the threes to play the fours instead, and vice versa. And it would sound chaotic, but if you dialed up and down the tempo, there would be one speed in the whole thing where that they would fall into a new rhythm. It wouldn't be either threes or fours. It would be something else. You know, it would sound like falling downstairs, but you could tune, and then suddenly there would be something. So I was like, oh, this is the way I'll find this thing. This is the ghost in this machine. You know, this is the fluke. They didn't intend for it to be done this way. So this is the way I'm going to do it. And that's how I found the basic cells that would make the thing. And then what I did was you could program 8 voices for any one setup that you did. So I figured out how to make all of the loops and all the sequences be triggered by 10 fingers. And the weird thing about it is that I played everything, you know, everything you hear on that recording is live. It's a live performance.
That's insane.
And there isn't any way that it could be otherwise, because much to my engineer's despair, you could not split those things back up into 8 MIDI outs. You just got the whole cosmos in one.
Can I interrupt you real quick? Because
this
is very interesting to me. There's a musician who I revere very much. I'll try and keep this short, but his name's Rod Keith. He was actually involved in this industry of music called song sharking, where in old magazines, people would send in their lyrics, and this guy would make them into records for like $75.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a ripoff thing, but these weird, very weird songs. Yeah, these very weird song and records came out of it. But this guy, what he was so amazing for was that he took the Mellotron and he would put entire tracks on each tape loop of the Mellotron, and he would just squeeze out like 75 songs in a session.
Oh, this is like, that is pretty much, that's another way to go about it. But yeah, I can see how that's very much the same thing. It was weird because the keys had, they were touch sensitive, and they had a function where you could press them and then second press and you'd get another thing to happen. So like, as long as I made the chord changes really precisely with my fingers and then like moved the fingers again on it, I could cause other instruments to come in and play the various parts. It was a mnemonic nightmare, actually, but it enabled me to like totally go into sort of like that club music world all by myself. And in live time too, you know, not something I've done a lot of studio constructions where you're laboriously making a mosaic, you know, you're putting in one track and another track and another track, and you're adjusting everything. This was not like that at all. It was really almost, I felt like that I was like, it was almost like driving a vehicle instead of playing a machine, you know. It felt like that you were traveling somewhere by accurately doing it. So that's how I did the music, and it was done at a period of time when too I couldn't get very much time to work on the music. So it was, the nice thing about it is that it was the first time I did a project where I didn't use live musicians in performance. Instead, I was using a pre-recorded thing. So I concentrated with the Fawn on, we did the performances of the Fawn. There were only 3 performances done of it. Well, 4 if you count a workshop that was done, but the 3 performances were done in art museums, and they were pretty much back to back. There were 2 performances done in one university museum, and then I had to move the whole show in a single day, the gauze box and all of the sonics and everything, to another museum. and do two performances there. But by doing that and having a crew of only 4 people, I was able to pull off more than I could have pulled with the Secret Commonwealth Ensemble, which was 30 people.
Did you overdub the vocals on the phone?
I did overdub. Some of them were recorded live with them, and some of them were overdubbed in it.
It's incredible. I would have never thought that was a live, or like the instrumentation was a live recording. That's kind of amazing.
Talk to my engineer sometime. He just, when he finally realized there was no way we could do it other than just recording it like that with a single mic, you know, so you can't you can't do any adjustment of the drum sound vis-a-vis the bass sound or anything like that. You get just
EQ. Yeah, EQ is the best you got there.
That's all you could do with it. And you know what he did in order to get around that? He meticulously learned to play some lines in it and stripped it out and replayed them himself, note by note, duplicating what I had done so that he could manage to mix them, which I thought was an act of real devotion, actually.
That's crazy. Wow. I'm glad I asked.
Well,
yeah. That's fascinating.
Your listeners may not be so glad.
No. I mean, if they listen to the record, which they definitely should. Yeah, that's pretty marvelous achievement.
The thing I love about about that, I mean, every method that you might take to convey your music to another person is going to have some problematics to it and some snafus to it. Like I myself am kind of shy about music. Like if the 3 of us were in a room and I had a guitar and I was supposed to play one of my songs for you, it would be excruciating for me. I'd nearly die of the vulnerability that's involved because I'm a trance musician. I go into a trance whenever I guess that's the word for it. I'm definitely not there in some ways. So it seems very vulnerable to me. Give me 50 people or 100 people or 1,000 people. And I'm as easy and smooth as can be with it. Give me 1 person, 2 persons, 3 persons in a room, and it about kills me.
Yeah.
But what I like about the Fawn is that it feels so much inside the dance was inside a gauze box, and that piece of music is inside that machine, you know, and it's like you're inside a bubble whenever you experience it. If you put on headphones and you go into that world of the Fawn, it just seems like marvelously synthetic to me. Like you're in a place where the you know, everything has been made out of nothingness, but it's all solid. So I still enjoy listening to it. You know, it's been some years, but I do enjoy it. And I never worked that way again, and I probably won't ever work that way.
So interesting. Wow. I would have thought that there were like several players on that record.
No, and you know what's crazy about it too is that I did do 2 musical overdubs. There are 2 real guitars that are played in that recording. And they're in 2 separate pieces. One is acoustic guitar and one is electric guitar. But I think it has some of my very best guitar writing in it, electric guitar writing, and it's all fake. It's like it's joy sticks and knobs, and you know, it wasn't just playing the keys. I had to play the knobs a lot on that synthesizer too, as well. All the filters and things on it. So, but it just seemed like a kind of funny thing to me. I love guitar music, obviously, and I really love the electric guitar. Sometimes I'm doing a project where I can play it. Sometimes I'm doing a project where that's not the thing to play at all. And that one was kind of funny in that I think it's got a lot of great electric guitar parts in it, and none of them are real. They're all
So I'm no stranger to electronic music, but yeah, I just wouldn't have made that out. That's pretty great. I'm gonna inject maybe our final listener question, and this is the deepest one of all. So I hope you're ready for this. It's pretty long. It's long.
I was
going
gonna
to
ask this
show.
one.
I was
okay.
I was born for this question.
You want to ask this listener question, Ben?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
What's your favorite dessert?
Oh, wow. That's okay.
We need to put a new tape in for this one.
This is kind of I'm just gonna choose something because I'm a person that comes from a world of seasonality. So you'd have to ask me what's the best day to have a dessert on, and then because things change here. So coming up pretty soon here is gonna be wild black raspberries, and a wild black raspberry pie is pretty high up on my list of things. Maybe it's not my absolute favorite, but I think my favorite dessert would involve fruit instead of chocolate or even just sugar. Although
Same.
I do love sugar pie and a lot of other things, but I'm going to say just for now in my fantasy world, because it's coming soon, I hope, a wild black raspberry pie. Unfortunately, I won't be able to have it with a dollop of whipped cream in it because due to long COVID, apparently I have developed a profound allergy to milk.
Wow.
And this is like heartbreaking.
Yeah, that is.
I won't do a lot of crying and whining about it. But just to say, this came at the point where I was really starting to feel good about how good I was at making pastry. And most of the pastry making I was doing involved butter. And so now I'm having to rethink dessert, actually. If you want to know what the latest dessert I had was, it is a shoe fly pie. Have you ever had that?
I have not.
What is I'm forgetting now what it is, but
that's a Pennsylvania Dutch dessert. You know, there's an old song that said, shoe fly pie and apple pan dowdy makes your tongue stick out and your belly say howdy. Shoe fly pie is a pie that's sort of like a magic pie in a way. You make a crust, you mix up molasses and water and baking soda and pour this liquid in it's 50-50 molasses and water and with some baking soda, and you pour it in the crust, and then you put a crumble that's made of butter and flour, in this case vegan butter, flour and sugar, like a coffee cake would have a crumble on the top of it. Put it all over this, and then the thing cooks, and the top part is like a coffee cake and the bottom part is like a pecan pie.
Wow.
That sounds good.
It is good.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. I made one yesterday, so
I'd have to, my favorite is pretty close, but I'm a huge fan of a really good strawberry rhubarb pie.
Ooh, yes. Oh man, now I'm going to backtrack on the black raspberry.
Ben,
I do have an advice for that. If you don't do it already, if you put an excess of cardamom and nutmeg in it, like a full heaping teaspoon of each, which is a lot to put in something. I think that bumps the strawberry rhubarb up.
interesting. Wow.
Oh, I didn't even come prepared for this question for me. Well, if it's a really, really good one, it's hard to beat flan.
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree.
I have a request from my Veracruz friend Chano, who just asked me to make a flan. So it's coming up, and I've got to figure that one out. I guess using almond or oat milk. I'll make it for him out of milk and cream if need be. because it doesn't kill me to eat it. But I am curious if I can manage to make it out of a nut milk that will be fit to eat, you know. Ooh, good
Yeah.
flan is a good thing.
Good flan.
All right. Well, the next time that we're all in one space together, shall endeavor to make at least one or more of these desserts.
Sounds excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really hoping that we can get together and have a couple beers and eat some desserts.
You know where Dandelion is. So
No better venue for sure.
next time you're here, we'll do it.
Yeah, I gotta get out there sometime.
Maybe me and Ben will take a little road trip.
You know,
Yeah.
it's. I used to say that it's a lot like Disneyland, only smaller and more tastefully done.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid to say that now, lest some Ron DeSantis
Yeah, shut it down.
will pop up and shut me down.
Well, I guess we'll cut it there for now. But thanks so much for joining us again, Dan. It's always a pleasure. So many amazing insights in there, and yeah, truly incredible. Thank you so much for joining us again.
It's really a huge pleasure. We were talking about science a little bit earlier, and to me, this is science because science is discourse. You know, it's talking about what you believe. That's what it's about. You give your theories, you give your ideas to it, and I appreciate what you guys are doing, and having this kind of cyber salon.
Yeah.
Where that ideas can be presented and discussed, and it's always interesting and a pleasure to me, and I always come away from it with new things to ponder. So I appreciate it very much, and appreciate very much your listeners too, the people that are out there. My greetings to you all, and I hope that you enjoyed it. It's good. Look me up if you're in my part of the digital universe, or if you happen to be in Southern Kentucky, in Dandelion itself.
Amen. All right. Well, thanks as always for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Okay, great. Bye.
Okay.
I will grow and kill 10,000, said the tiny fire drake in my hand. Lay this land to waste, wet my teeth on the bones of the heroes. Blood will flow for the gold that I will gather. Blood will flow for the gold that I will gather. Look into my eyes, he said, where the point of fire is dancing. What you hear you won't remember. I'm just a funny salamander. I will fly through the night scorching cities. I will fly through the night scorching cities. Coins and crowns will make my bed. I will taste the tears of a virgin. In a cave I'll coil my rings, crust my scales with the diamonds glitter. Take your chance, crush me now and claim your glory. Take your chance, crush me now and claim your glory. tiny lizard down upon the sand, and I watched it scurry on the strand. The waves were pounding a dragon song as I went walking. Dream your dreams by the sea, I will not harm you. Dream your dreams by the sea, I will not harm you.